Hello and welcome to Top Deck. It's that time of the month again when we look at the top 5 most popular decks in Standard, Pioneer, Pauper, and Modern. It is the monthly meta breakdown. Uh, few few points of order before we begin. First of all, thanks to midterm season rolling right into final season, and I've gotten this video out a bit later than intended, and therefore there will be no January meta breakdown. This will be the last one until February. Actually, this will also be the last video until the new year because right after I record this video, I'm going to have just enough time to edit it and get it up on YouTube before I have to go home to a place where there's not really good internet. I mean, there's good enough internet to record videos, but not really good enough internet to post them. So this is going to be my final video of the year. Hope it works out. It's about midnight as I start recording this, so let's get into it. All right, as always, the Stone Brain picks are the top 3 cards in each deck, my choice, that you would want to name with a Stone Brain that lets you exile cards from your opponent's deck. In short, the Stone Brain picks are the best 3 cards in each deck. And now, something new. One viewer on my last meta breakdown suggested that I include the actual cards that I'm talking about when I'm breaking down decks to assist people who were not native English speakers. I thought that was a great idea, and so I'll be doing that from here on out. So, Carlos Sam Prequinto 2777, I hope this works out for you. I mean, hope this is what you wanted. So, with that, let's get into Standard. Standard really hasn't changed a whole lot. So at first look, we have Jeskai Aggro making up 5.3% of the meta. This is actually just Boros Convoke from like Pioneer, but splashing blue for Spyglass Siren and Disdainful Stroke in the sideboard. So the way this deck works is it starts off with little guys like Spyglass Siren. They come down for like 1 mana, they make an artifact. In the case of Spyglass Siren, it makes a map token. And then you blow up those map tokens, or what other artifacts come down with your creatures, with Gleeful Demolition. This will create you 3 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens. Now you'll have like 4 or 5 creatures on the board, and you'll use those to convoke out big threats like Knight Errant of Eos. Knight Errant of Eos, when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 6 cards of your library. You reveal up to 2 creature cards with mana value X or less from among them, where X is the number of creatures that convoke Knight Errant of Eos, and you put the revealed cards into your hand and shuffle the rest into your library. So that way you play out your small threats, you use them to play the larger threat, and then the larger threat searches out or helps you find more gas for the future. It's a very nice strategy and has seen some success in the Pioneer format. It's a go-wide aggro deck, and if you're new to the format, I would suggest testing this one out. Something also that we have to talk about Imidane's Recruiter, because like making a whole bunch of dorks is really fine and good and dandy and all that, but if they don't actually pack any kind of a punch, it's just going to be death by 1,000 paper cuts as opposed to actually ending the game quickly the way aggro decks want to. And Imidane's Recruiter is really good for that because it gives your entire attack force +1/+0 and haste until the end of the turn. You can also spend 5 mana to do the Train Troops adventure sorcery to create 2 2/2 white knight creatures with vigilance before you actually play Imidane's Recruiter if you so desire. And then the last part of the deck that I kind of want to highlight is Sheltered by Ghosts. Sheltered by Ghosts is a new aura from Duskmourn, and man, is it a house. So what you can do is you can enchant a creature you control, preferably an Imidane's Recruiter or a Knight Errant of Eos, and you can exile a permanent an opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. So you get to journey to nowhere something. But Sheltered by Ghosts gives the enchanted creature +1/+0, lifelink, and Ward 2. Ward 2 is really, really hard to get around. I mean, okay, it's not that hard. I mean, but it's harder than it would seem. So it's a really good removal and protection spell that really helps make this deck click and really helps solidify this deck as a top 5 deck in the meta at the moment. So that is Jeskai Aggro. Moving on to the 4th most popular deck in Standard at the moment, we come to Mono Red Prowess. This is another aggro deck. This one is a lot more straightforward than Jeskai the Jeskai aggro deck was. So what you want to do is you want to play out a lot of little guys like Heartfire Hero, and then you target them with spells like Monstrous Rage. So the Monstrous Rage will trigger the Valiant on Heartfire Hero, and it will add counters to the Heartfire Hero, and when Heartfire Hero dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So you want to be targeting your Heartfire Hero, excuse me, with your Monstrous Rages, and to make them all big, and they become big threats on their own. You also have threats like Hired Claw that whenever you attack with one or more lizards, Hired Claw deals 1 damage to target opponent. So Hired Claw is a very good 1-drop for aggro decks in Standard at the moment. Speaking of good cards for aggro decks at the moment, let's talk about Screaming Nemesis. Screaming Nemesis is probably... Okay, it might not be the best card in the deck. That might go to Heartfire Hero, but Screaming Nemesis is definitely one of the best creatures. So it's a 3/3 for haste, 3/3 with haste for 3 mana, which is already, on curve, kind of what you want to be doing in an aggro deck. However, whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any other target: planeswalker, battle, creature, your opponent. Speaking of which, if a player is dealt damage this way, like your opponent, they can't gain life for the rest of the game. So it's a great way to shut off. It's a great way to shut off your opponent's lifelink strategies if they had any. Yeah, Mono Red Prowess just wants to end the game quickly, and Screaming Nemesis really helps prevent them from clawing their way back into it. So that is why it is a Stonebrain pick alongside Heartfire Hero and Hired Claw. Moving on to the number 3 deck in the meta, we have Gruul Prowess. We just got aggro deck after aggro deck here in Standard, which is kind of what we were expecting after Bloomborough was a very aggressive set. Anyway, so this deck starts out pretty much the same way. You've got your Heartfire Heroes, and you want to be targeting them with your Monstrous Rages. Make your Heartfire Heroes big and start swinging at your opponent really hard. But where this deck starts to go different from your mono red deck is this deck includes Slickshot Show Off, which is a flying hasting 1/2 for 2 mana, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Slickshot Show Off gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And you can also plot it for 1 in a red, so you can actually double spell if you so desire. Like, you don't have to play the Slickshot Show Off when you don't have mana available to immediately target it with a Monstrous Rage. Slickshot Show Off is another very strong card for aggro decks in Standard at the moment, just because like the flying, the evasion from flying really helps drive home those points of damage that you could sorely be lacking if you just stuck to a ground-based strategy. And additionally, we still have Screaming Nemesis. All the stuff I said about Screaming Nemesis just a second ago is just as true for Gruul Prowess. So where does the Gruul come in? It mostly comes in the sideboard with Questing Druid, which allows you to have some card draw. Card draw is off its adventure side, Seek the Beast. So that was Gruul Prowess. Let's move on to the number 2 deck in the Standard meta, which is Golgari Midrange at 14.2% of the meta. This is a divergence from the aggro decks that we've just been seeing in the last 3 decks. This is a mid-range deck, and this deck wants to grind you out in any ways possible. It wants to play just good value creatures and beat you with card quality rather than speed or card quantity. So the poster child for this deck is Preacher of the Schism, which is a 2/4 Vampire Cleric for 3 mana with Death Touch, and whenever it attacks, depending on what your life total is compared to your opponent, you either get yourself a card, or you get yourself a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink, or both if you have the exact same life total as your opponent. That is a lot of good stuff, stapled to 1 3-mana body, but that's not the only good creature in the deck. There's also Mosswood Dreadknight, which is a 3/2 for 2, and it has trample, and whenever it dies, you may cast it from your graveyard as an adventure until the end of your next turn. And its adventure side is you draw a card and lose a life. This card is very annoying to get rid of, speaking as someone who has played against it, because it's like, okay, I killed the Dread Knight, it comes back, and they got a card. I killed the Dread Knight, it comes back, they get a card. It's quite painful. So if you do go up against this deck, it maybe sideboard in like a single piece of graveyard hate just to deal with the Mosswood Dread Knights and stop whatever card advantage they're getting. It should be noted, though, that if they're just dirtling around and drawing cards, they're not impacting the board state too much. So if tempo is something that you're worried about, that is a space where you can make up a tempo on your opponent. However, drawing cards is good for your opponent in other ways too, especially if they have Shieldred the Apocalypse. Shieldred, if you don't know what this card does, welcome to Standard. It is a 4-mana 4/5 with Death Touch, and whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life, and whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. There are just so many ways this card is just very strong. This card can go into a combo deck. It can go into a mid-range deck. This Shieldred is a house. It is probably just the best card in this deck outright. So if you see Shieldred, kill it on sight, please. So while your opponent is deploying out these like good value creatures, they're also going to be trying to kill yours with removal spells. Lots and lots of removal spells. There are so many in this deck. The one that you should really pay attention to is Go for the Throat, because it's probably the most universal of all the kill spells they have. It just destroys a non-artifact creature, and unless you're really running an artifact strategy, this will hit pretty much everything in your deck. So that is the best removal spell in the Golgari midrange shell. So that was Golgari midrange. Let's move onward and upward to its blue cousin, Dimir midrange, making up a whopping 22.8% of the meta. So this deck is, you could think of this as kind of like a mono blue flash deck that also plays black removal. That's a really good way of thinking about it. So like a lot of these creatures flash in and generally just draw cards. Like this Fairy Mastermind here. It's a 2/1 with flying and flash, and whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. And you can also force each player to draw a card for a total of 3 in a blue. That is not a tap ability. You can activate that multiple times. And so it's just a great way to just get extra card advantage on your opponent. Plus, it's it's 2 power in the air, which is relevant more times than you would like to think. Accompanying Fairy Mastermind is Enduring Curiosity, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. And when it dies, if it was a creature, it comes back to the battlefield under its owner's control as just an enchantment. It goes from being an enchantment creature to just enchantment. So this pairs very well with Fairy Mastermind, because you can play your Fairy Mastermind out, then you can play your Enduring Curiosity and just start poking your opponent in the air with your Mastermind to draw extra cards. This card can snowball pretty easily, because it's not whenever one or more creatures, it's every creature that hits you. So if let's say you had 2 Fairy Masterminds, or a Fairy Mastermind and a Spyglass Siren hitting your opponent, you're drawing 2 cards as opposed to just 1. So this card can get out of hand pretty quickly. So that is why it is also a Stonebrain pick, alongside Kaito, Bane of Nightmares. As it turns out, putting ninjutsu on a Planeswalker is pretty darn good. So the way Kaito works is you can attack with one of your evasive threats, and then you can ninjutsu him in for 1, a blue, and a black. During your turn, Kaito is actually a 3/4 ninja with hexproof that you can also activate the loyalty abilities on, and his +1's pretty good, because it buffs himself. Ninjas you control get +1/+1s. He also helps with card selection, because he allows you to surveil 2, and then you draw a card for each opponent who lost life this turn. So most of the time, this is ninjutsu in Kaito. Hit you, surveil 2, draw a card. But one of the ways I see this card used most is this -2 ability, which allows you to tap a target creature and put 2 stun counters on it. And that's really good for shutting down activated abilities. That's really good for just getting problematic blockers out of the way, stopping aggressive threats, because while these 2 stun counters are wearing off, you can buff Kaito back up with its +1 ability, and then immediately just -2 it as soon as those stun counters come off. So yeah, Kaito is just a house. And as it was with the Golgari mid-range deck, we have Go for the Throat as the removal spell of choice. There seem to be fewer removal spells in this Dimir suite as there were in the Golgari suite. However, I mean, Go for the Throat is still a very strong card and something you should watch out for. So yeah, that's Dimir midrange and Standard as a whole. What are my thoughts on Standard? Well, really quick, I mean, I think it's holding strong. I mean, I still think Standard is a very good place for innovation, even though the top end of the spectrum is really dominated by either aggro decks or mid-range decks. I mean, I don't know if there's like a super good control deck in the format right now. And I also don't think like this is a very good meta for like combo decks, because of all the removal heavy mid-range decks being so prevalent. I mean, 22.8% of the meta. That's like 1 in 4 players is playing Dimir midrange. So that's where standard is at the moment. If you're trying to get into Magic, I would recommend standard or maybe Pauper, but standard seems fun right now. Anyway, speaking of fun formats, let's get on to my favorite format, Pioneer. If you've mastered standard and you don't find it a challenge anymore, first of all, who are you kidding? Second of all, try Pioneer. Pioneer has you can play all your favorite standard strategies here because all the cards that are standard legal are Pioneer legal, mostly. So let's get into the top 5 decks. First up, at the number 5 spot, we have Niv 2 Light, making up 6.1% of the meta. It is a fun deck to try to explain, mostly because the card list is just so long. So what you really want to be doing is you want to be fixing your mana early. That's why like Sylvan Caryatid is a very important card in this deck because it adds 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and you will be playing all 5 colors in this deck. So Sylvan Caryatid might be the most important creature in this deck outside of maybe Niv Mizzet, but I think it still beats Niv Mizzet, honestly. So what are you going to do with all this colored mana? Well, you're going to play Niv Mizzet. Niv Mizzet is a Wooburg creature. It is a 6/6 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each color pair, choose a card that is exactly those colors from among them. Put the chosen cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So basically, you get a card from each of the 10 guilds of Ravnica. So all of your spells, like your Abrupt Decays, Lightning Helix, Pillage the Bogs, all of these cards are very specifically chosen to be able to hit off of Niv Mizzet. So you can just stock up your hand with just really good cards. Niv Mizzet is definitely something that should be catching a counterspell if you see your opponent playing it. The only spell in the deck that Niv can't hit that is of any note is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Fable of the Mirror Breaker is probably the best card in the Pioneer format, not just the red color, not just in this deck, but just as a whole. Because for 3 mana, you get a 2/2 red goblin creature shaman whenever it attacks, you get a treasure. It allows you to discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many back. And then when you flip it over, you get a kind of like Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker, but you have to spend 1 mana to activate it and makes copies of creatures you control, non-legendary creatures you control, I should say. This card was on my radar to be banned recently. I thought Fable might bite the axe a little bit because it goes in pretty much any red deck. It is strong, it is ubiquitous, it is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Now we've talked about Niv Mizzet already, so let's talk about the other part of the Niv to Light name of this deck with Bring to Light. So Bring to Light it doesn't look like much when you first look at it, so you have like 5 mana, and then you search your library for a creature, instant, or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to the number of colors spent to cast the spell, exile that card, and then shuffle. You may cast the card that you found without paying its mana cost. So this goes back to the Sylvan Caryatid on why it's very important to fix your mana early so you can get 4 or 5 colors to cast your Bring to Light. So then you can go and find pretty much any card in your deck and cast it for free. So Bring to Light just becomes a wild card for the deck. It is one of the Stonebrain picks accordingly. Bring to Light is one of those cards that just naturally can have a deck built around it, and as proof of concept, here's a deck. So that was Niv to Light. Moving onward and upward to the number 4 deck in the meta, we have Jund's Sacrifice, making up a solid 6.3% of the meta. So this deck used to be just Rakdos deck. It was just a Rakdos deck, and it revolved around putting this Cauldron Familiar, which whenever it entered the battlefield, each opponent lost a life and you gained 1, and you could sack a food to return it from the graveyard to the battlefield. You could pair that with the Witch's Oven and sacrifice the Cauldron Familiar, and then you'd make a food token. So you could sacrifice a Cauldron Familiar in the Witch's Oven, and then the food that you got from that could be used to bring back the Cauldron Familiar, and in and out and in and out and in and out, and you just loop it through. And there are a lot of cool things you can do, like especially during combat with this card. And this was just sort of the engine to the Rakdos Sacrifice deck, along with Mayhem Devil. So whenever you sacrificed a permanent, Mayhem Devil would deal 1 damage to any target. And so while you're sacrificing your cats and your foods, your Mayhem Devil would just be pinging things down. And if you had multiple ovens on the board with your cats, you could run the loop several times, and you could be taking down a 4 toughness creature just by throwing a cat into an oven. So that is how this deck used to be. And then we go to Bloomburrow, and Igra, the Eater of All, is printed. Personally, I really like this card. Just from a fun perspective, it is a 5-mana 6/6 with Ward, Sacrifice a Food. Other creatures, your opponents included, are food artifacts in addition to their other types and have the food ability of being able to sacrifice them for 2 mana to gain 3 life. And whenever a food is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Igra gets 2+1/+1 counters. So the way Igra just kind of revolutionized this deck is now instead of like needing an oven on the field, what you can do is you can have one Cauldron Familiar in the graveyard, another on the battlefield, and since the Cauldron Familiar in the graveyard sees the one on the battlefield as food, you can sacrifice one Cauldron Familiar to the other and just have them switch places, and that would drain your opponent. However, you can do that over and over again because every time they switch places, they just see each other as food, and so you just have cats eating themselves and your opponent along with it. That is an infinite loop, and that also leaves you with an infinitely large Igra, and with infinite sacrifice triggers for your Mayhem Devil as well. And while that's all going on, you also have Scavenger's Talent now. That was also printed in Bloomburrow, and this helps you find your combo pieces. So essentially, whenever one or more creatures you control die, you create a food token. That happens only once each turn. So it was another duplicate oven. So it adds some duplicity to the oven plan. You can also level it up to level 2 for 1 and a black, and whenever you sacrifice a permanent, say a cat or a food or anything else, you can have target player mill 2 cards. During the early parts of the game, you would have yourself mill, and that way you can get a Cauldron Familiar into the graveyard early, or even an Igra, because and you don't mind putting Igra into the graveyard because for 3 mana you can level it up to level 3 after you've leveled it up to level 2, and then you can sacrifice 3 other non-land permanents to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you really hope to only need to do that once. So it's like, oh, Igra's in my graveyard. I also have a Cauldron Familiar on the battlefield and in the graveyard. I'm going to sacrifice 3 food tokens and just bring Igra out and just combo on my end step. If you want to see me and how I went about building Igra, check out this video up here, up in the upper right hand corner. It's not Jund, but it is a Golgari sacrifice deck that gets a lot of the same mechanics down. It's a good watch, and I do recommend it, and not just because I made it, but I actually really enjoy that video. Anyway, back to this. We're going to now talk about the number 3 deck in the meta. It is my favorite deck. Generally, I hype this card up, but it's still like we're past midnight at this point, so I don't have anything fun to say. But it is another graveyard deck. Is it Phoenix, making up 7.2% of the meta. This was the most popular deck in the format for a little bit, but it is falling back down. I'm going to guess it falls maybe a little bit further, but it should probably stay in the top 5 for the duration. So how does this deck work? Well, it focuses mainly on the namesake Arclight Phoenixes. It really wants to put these fellers into the bin, because at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you've cast 3 or more instant or sorcery spells this turn, you return Arclight Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. So let's say you've managed to get 2 or 3 Arclight Phoenixes into the bin, you play 3 cheap spells, and then you have 9 power on the board out of nowhere, and it can immediately attack your opponent in the air. These Phoenixes can close out games faster than you might think. So how do we get these Phoenixes into the bin? My favorite way is to use Ledger Shredder, specifically its Connive ability. So what you can do is when you cast your second spell each turn, a Ledger Shredder allows you to draw a card and then discard a card. And if it was a non-land card that you discarded, Ledger Shredder gets a +1/+1 counter. So hey, you have a Phoenix in your hand and you've got 3 cheap spells. You can play one, play a second one, Ledger Shredder will connive, you can put your Phoenix into the bin, and then Shredder will get bigger, and you'll draw a card. Or, yeah, you'll have another card in your hand, and Phoenix will be in the bin, and then you play your third spell for the turn, and Phoenix comes back. A lot of decks now are running this new enchantment called Artist Talent from Bloomburrow as well, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may discard a card, and if you do, you draw a card. And then you really don't worry about level 2 and 3. Like, you do not worry about these. You are playing this card solely for this first ability. So that way it turns every spell you cast into a discard spell as well. Personally, I wasn't too big on this card when it was first released. or because I was like, yeah, you can do that, but it's going to be a bit of a tempo loss because you're putting out a 2 mana do nothing card. It doesn't affect anything. However, later in this game, this card can really start rolling, but so it's a matter of, do you want to take the tempo loss early or and gain it back later, or do you just want to advance the board state with a ledger shredder? So that's kind of what you're worried about. There's also Prophecydetic Memory, which puts +1/+1 counters on creatures equal to the number of cards you've drawn in a turn -1, and this card works really well with that. It's probably the best way to get Prophecydetic Memory working. I'm not very big on Prophecydetic Memory just without artist talent, but together they work very well. Uh, Anyway, so what spells will you actually be casting to trigger your Ledger Shredders and your Artist Talents? You will be playing cards like Consider. These are just going to be 1 mana cantrips that mostly just draw you a replacement card. It is a lot of dirtling, just so much dirtling. You just kind of draw through your deck, find your Phoenixes, put them in the bin, and that's mostly what you're doing. You're not a lot of this deck just focuses on drawing cards. You do have some removal to keep your opponent's board clean, but you're mostly just drawing cards. And speaking of drawing cards, the best draw spell in the entire format lies in this deck, and that is Treasure Cruise. And so with your Treasure Cruise, you can delve away 7 cards in your graveyard. That happens very quickly. And so you can cast this card for only a single blue, and that allows you to draw 3 cards. And this card is really what gives it the late game staying power. As much as Artist Talent helps it out, Treasure Cruise is really the card that lets this deck stay as good as it has for so long. A lot of people wanted this card banned, and that was another target that potentially could have been hit alongside Fable of the Mirror Breaker. But it seems like the power level of the format has kind of adjusted and like warped around Treasure Cruise so that it's not too crazy of a card. Like, it's still one of the best cards in the format, but it doesn't make any one particular deck the best deck in the format. So that's Izzet Phoenix. That is my favorite deck. Now let's talk about the second most popular deck in the meta with Rakdos Prowess. So this deck actually has a banned card in it. Like, we've been talking about Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Treasure Cruise as cards that could potentially be banned. Well, this card actually has one. Gigantha the Wellspring. Ding Dong, the Wicked Witch is dead, I guess. Gigantha had this companion requirement that every card in your deck had no more than one of any one specific pip. So, like, it could only have 1 red pip in there, no 2 red pips. So you could never run Eidolon of the Great Revel in this Rakdos Prowess deck. Not sure if you would want to anyway, but you would just be prevented from doing so if you wanted to run Gigantha. So Gigantha is no more. I'm guessing that eventually all of the companion cards will be kicked out of the format. I mean, Gigantha is just the next to go. But anyway, this list is from before the ban happened, because I was working on this video before December 16. But let's get back to the actual deck, the cards that are not banned and the cards that are still here, and we're back to talking about Heartfire Hero. Heartfire Hero, whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So it's a great little aggressive threat to just deploy early. And you can target it with, like, Infuriates and your Monstrous Rages and the like, and it just gets really big really quickly, especially for only 1 mana. Accompanying your Heartfire Hero is the ever aggressive Slickshot Showoff. And Slickshot Showoff says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So you can target these all with your Monstrous Rages, and so it gets a total of +5/+1 until end of turn. So 1 Monstrous Rage on a Slickshot Showoff just hits for 6 out of nowhere. And it also has the plot ability, so you can basically pay for the Slickshot Showoff early, so that way you can double spell if that is your desire. The last card I want to talk about when talking about Rakdos Prowess is pretty much the only card that makes this deck actually Rakdos. I mean, like, yeah, we're not going to talk about Claim to Fame, but it's the Callous Sellsword. Don't read this. Do not read this, because that's not why people are playing it. They're playing it for the sorcery, the adventure half, Burn Together. And that has target creature you control deal damage equal to its power to any other target, then sacrifice it. So it is in essence a fling card. It is essentially just fling. but I mean, it operates slightly differently, but the differences are minimal. Uh, and so this card is really just your way of finishing games. So you make a really big Heartfire hero or a really big Slick Shot show off, you bonk your opponent, and then when they think that they've survived to their upkeep where they can do some shenanigans, you just hit them in the face with the creature again off the burn together of Callous Sellsword. So it's just a good way to finish games. And that's why it's a Stone Brain pick alongside Heartfire Hero and Slick Shot Show Off. And now, the top spot in the Pioneer meta coming in at 18.3% of the meta. I forgot what that number was. It's another Rakdos deck. It's Rakdos Midrange. What's there to say about this deck? It is everything a mid-range deck should be. It attacks the hand, it kills the creatures early, it gets rid of the big threats, it piles on the pressure with just good value creatures. It has been a mainstay of this format for a very long time now, as long as it Phoenix, and it will continue to be in the top parts of the meta so long as there are good value cards in black and red. So, what are the cards that we are worried about for this deck? We are worried about the Thoughtseize and Fatal Push combinations that just really disrupt your opponent's plan early. So, Thoughtseize, you can basically look at their hand and take their best card. And then Fatal Push just gets rid of one of their early creatures, and that can really, really throw them off, especially if they're on, say, like a mono-green ramp strategy. Just they'll play an elf on, then you'll just kill it with this Fatal Push, and then you'll go on to your turn. So, I mean, there is a reason why Fatal Push is a 4 of in the deck, as well as Thoughtseize, because they are the best opening plays that you can make in a black deck in general, not just Rakdos. This deck also runs 2-drops that are pretty good, that are like Blood Tithe Harvester. Blood Tithe Harvester has a special place in my heart, mostly because it has been pretty much the one constant card that is always in this deck, no matter how the rest of the list changes, apart from Thoughtseize and Fatal Push. It is the one creature that stays constant throughout all these years. So when it comes down, it makes a blood token. Creatures that make artifacts on ETB are pretty good, especially when they're only 1 or 2 mana and the artifact can help you get cards. You can also sacrifice the Blood Tithe Harvester and have target creature get -X until end of turn, where X is twice the number of blood tokens you control. However, you do have to do that at sorcery speed. It is everything you want in a mid-range deck. It is a cheap body that can help get you cards, and it can help be removal. There's not a whole lot more you can ask for. This deck also runs the ever-popular Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Like I said, it goes in basically every red deck. So one of the tricks you can do with Fable of the Mirror Breaker is when it flips over to its other side, the Reflection of Kiki Jiki, what you can do is you can use that to copy the Blood Tithe Harvester, and that will make you an extra blood token, and then you can sacrifice that token copy of the Blood Tithe Harvester that has haste to just pick off one of your opponent's like medium-sized to larger threats. And so the combination of Fable of the Mirror Breaker with Blood Tithe Harvester just kind of becomes repeatable removal, and it's kind of a pain to play against. This deck also is now running Unstoppable Slasher. It is a 3-mana 2/3 with Death Touch, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they lose half their life rounded up. And when it dies, if it had no counters on it, return it to the battlefield tapped, under its owner's control with 2 stun counters on it. Basically, you have to kill this card twice within a short period of time if you want to kill it at all. Is a very painful card to play against. That's why it's one of the Stone Brain picks alongside Fable with the Mirror Breaker. The other creature that we are going to be talking about is the Bloodletter of Aclazotz. So this works really well with the Unstoppable Slasher. So Slasher says that you lose half your life rounded up. Bloodletter says, no, you're going to lose all of your life right now, because it says every time, if an opponent would lose life, they lose twice as much instead. That's every instance, like every time. Like the Bloodletter of Aclazotz is one of the few 4-drops that can compete with Sheoldred to fill the 4-drop spot of this deck. We are also going to be talking about the Unholy Annex and Ritual Chamber. So Unholy Annex and Ritual Chamber, this is one of the new enchantment rooms from Duskmourn, and at the beginning of your end step for the Unholy Annex, you draw a card. If you control a demon, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Otherwise, you lose 2 life. By the way, guess what's a demon? The Bloodletter itself. And if you, let's say all your Bloodletters are gone, you can also just play the Ritual Chamber to create a 6/6 black demon creature. This card is a Stonebrain pick pretty much just for the card draw it provides you. The life loss is pretty inconsequential because most of the time your opponent will be the one paying the price. So that's why I have Unholy Annex and Ritual Chamber as the third Stonebrain pick. Hey, really quick, I know this is kind of weird considering I'm not going to post until January, but if you like this video, please, hit that thumbs up button and subscribe so you don't miss the next time I do this, even though the next time I do this will be in February. I'm really, really close to getting 100 subscribers, which is just really awesome, and I appreciate everyone who subscribes. I didn't think I would get this far. Like, my goal for the end of this year was 50 people to subscribe to my channel, and we're already at 80. So from the bottom of my inky black heart, thank you. Thank you very much. And yeah, let's get on to the rest of the video. We're going to be talking about the People's format, Pauper. So what's new in Pauper? Basically nothing. The thing that's new is the number 5 deck is now Madness Burn instead of a Gruul ramp deck. So Madness Burn at 5.6% of the meta really focuses around this card, Faithless Looting. Faithless Looting allows you to draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards. Faithless Looting is already a good effect in and of itself, and it works really well with the Madness cards that we're about to talk about in a little bit. The other way to draw cards and discard cards is Grab the Prize, which as an additional cost to cast Grab the Prize, you discard a card and then you draw 2, and it also deals 2 damage to each opponent if you did not discard a land card. So what are you actually discarding? Because as crazy as it sounds, the draw is cool, the discard is better. The things you'll be discarding are actually the things you want to play, like Alms of the Vein. So what happens is target opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. That's normally a 3 mana spell, but you can get it for a single black mana. You can Lightning Helix your opponent for 1 black mana if you discard Alms of the Vein first off of Faithless Looting. You also have cards like Kitchen Imp, which if you discard it, you can get this Flying Hasting 2/2 for a single black mana as well. That's normally a 4 mana spell, so this is a 3 mana discount. You also have cards like Sneaky Snacker that really, really benefit from Faithless Looting and Grab the Prize, because whenever you draw your 3rd card in a turn, you can return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So let's say this card is in your graveyard off of Faithless Looting. You can flash back that same Faithless Looting to draw a couple of cards, and guess what? Sneaky Snacker comes right back to the battlefield. I mean, it will come back tapped, but that's okay. It can't attack anyway. It doesn't have haste. So it's just a recursive threat that really adds some power to the deck. We also have Galvanic Blast. Speaking of power, this is one of, if not the single best burn spell for this deck. If you control 3 or more artifacts, it's 4 damage to anything. That's Lightning Bolt +1. And Lightning Bolt is already one of the best cards, one of the best red 1-drops ever printed. And Galvanic Blast is right up there in power level with it. And getting 3 artifacts on the battlefield is not that hard because Drossforge Bridge, the Great Furnace, and just pretty much all of these lands that are not basic lands are artifacts. So that is where your extra damage for Galvanic Blast comes from. It's a great removal spell and really helps this deck keep up with some of the other decks in the format. Speaking of other decks in the format, let's move on to the 4 in format. Mono Blue Terror, also known as Mono Blue Delver, making up a solid 6% of the meta. So what does this deck want to do? It cares a lot about instants and sorceries to make its creatures cheaper or better. So first up, we're going to be looking at the Delver of Secrets. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can look at the top card of your library, and if it's an instant or sorcery card, you reveal it, and then you flip your Delver of Secrets, and it becomes an Insectile Abomination, and it is a flying 3/2. So you can effectively get a 3/2 flyer that can hit your opponent on your next turn for just a single blue mana, provided the top card is an instant or a sorcery card. You also have cards like Cryptic Serpent and Tolarian Terror. Don't worry about reading Cryptic Serpent. It basically says the same thing as Tolarian Terror, except it does not have the Ward 2 of Terror. These are both 7 mana snakes that cost less for each instant or sorcery in your grave. Each one of them has 5 toughness. This is an 8 snake deck. And so what you do is you really focus on playing your instants and sorceries to get out your snakes early. The best instant or sorcery you can be playing early game is probably Brainstorm, because Brainstorm will set up your hand as well as the top of your deck to flip the Delvers of Secrets, and it allows you to draw 3 cards and then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. I run Brainstorm even in like a 4-color Reanimator deck, because it's a card that really helps the consistency of your hands and of your deck as a whole. It's probably the best cantrip in this deck. We also have cards like Lorien Revealed, so early in the game, you can use its island cycling ability, so you can spend 1 and then go search an island from your deck to your hand. And then later in the game, when you have like 5 mana to spare, you can draw 3 cards, and that just really helps keep the cards coming. So it's good in the early game and in the late game, and it really helps keep this deck running, much like Treasure Cruise helps keep Izzet Phoenix running in Pioneer. The last card I want to talk about in this deck is Counterspell. It's very simple. It was printed in Alpha, 2 blue mana, counter target spell. This is how this deck really deals with a lot of threats, is just to stop them before they're even played. You counter them, and the best counterspell ever printed is Counterspell. Or the best counterspell in Pauper, that is Counterspell. So the Stonebrain picks are the Delver of Secrets, Tolarian Terror, and Cryptic Serpent, mostly because those are your only ways to actually finish the game. All the other cards are cool, but those are the ways you actually pack your punches. All right, moving on to the number 3 deck in the meta, we have the Brood Scale combo. So all these other decks, I actually had a full card here, and I was going through and explaining the cards or whatever. But no, Brood Scale combo, making up 9.4% of the meta, bringing it to the number 3 spot in the meta, is best explained through a diagram. So we're going to walk through the combo here. So the way the combo works is you start off and you play a land and you pass. Then you play a second land and you play out Basking Broodscale. This is a 2/2 for 2 mana with Devoid, so it has no color, but that really doesn't make a difference. And for 1 and a green, you can add a +1/+1 counter to it if it had no +1/+1 counters on it already. And whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Basking Broodscale, you create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn creature token with sack this creature, add colorless. So on your next turn, you play another land and you play Sadistic Glee on your Basking Broodscale. You then use this adaptability that I talked about to create your spawn and put a counter on it. This spawn can sacrifice itself as soon as it's born. So what you do is you immediately sacrifice the spawn to add colorless. That will trigger the Sadistic Glee, and whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, yes, tokens do hit the graveyard, if you didn't know. Basking Broodscale will get an additional counter, and that will make another spawn. And so what you can do is you can kind of just loop through spawns, making your Basking Broodscale bigger and bigger, and all the time you're netting an additional mana. And so what you can do is then you can play... My favorite way to go about this is to play your Energy Refractor. And so when it comes in, it draws a card, you don't care about that. So you're going to take all your now infinite colorless mana, and you can turn that into infinite colored mana as well. And then my favorite way to finish the game is Nadier's Nightblade. So whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So all these spawns that are coming through to make your mana and such, suddenly they become your source of draining your opponent and just winning the game. You went from empty board to winning the game with infinite mana, infinite death triggers, infinite life gain triggers, in just 3 turns. So that's the power of the Basking Broodscale deck. The only real other card that I kind of want to talk about is Deadly Dispute, and Deadly Dispute lets you sacrifice a creature or an artifact for 2 mana, and then you draw 2 cards and get a treasure token. Basking Broodscale has been making waves in the meta since Modern Horizons 3 came out, and this deck is not going away soon, though I would suggest consulting the deck list that I had up earlier to see what a more modern version of this deck looks like. But this is the core combo. Next up, at the number 2 spot in the Pauper meta, we have Grixis Affinity at a solid 12% of the meta. So what does this deck want to do? It wants to vomit. It wants to throw up all over the board. What is it vomiting? It is vomiting artifacts, and that starts with the artifact lands. all of these lands you see here, with the exception of this random swamp that I'm just now noticing, are artifacts. And what do these artifact lands do? They're going to play more artifact spells, and when you have a lot of artifact spells on the battlefield, you can start getting discounts with affinity. So affinity for artifacts means this spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. Yes, you can count your lands towards this. So Thoughtcast is your draw spell of choice. So for essentially 1 blue mana, because it is so easy to get 4 artifacts on the battlefield with this deck, you are drawing 2 cards. You also have Galvanic Blast that we talked about a little bit earlier. Again, the lands are really powering the 4 damage to any target that you can find on Galvanic Blast. We also have cards like Refurbished Familiar, which is a 2/1 with affinity for artifacts. So whenever you see a number in one of these affinity cards, just cross it out. Just cross it out. Like, your opponent will understand. Cross it out. This is 1 black mana. This is not a 4 mana spell. This is a 1 mana spell. And it has flying, and when this card enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. And if your opponent can't, you draw a card. This card is an inherent 2-for-1, just because you get a creature on the battlefield, and you either draw a card or your opponent has to ditch one. There is also the big, bad punching glove of the deck in Mirror Enforcer. So affinity for artifacts. Like I said, you can just basically cross off the 7. This card is free. This is a free 4/4 that you can just play. Because it is easy to get 7 artifacts on the battlefield. I have tested this deck privately, and it just feels unfair because of how fast you can meet the affinity requirements for things. So it's just a 4/4 that you can play for basically free, and that's why it's a Stonebrain Familiar alongside Galvanic Blast and Refurbished Familiar. All right. Let's get on to the top dog in Pauper in terms of popularity. It is the deck that is as old as Magic itself, making up a whopping 17.4% of the meta. It is Burn. Burn is the easiest deck to learn, and I think that's part of why it's so popular. I mean, it's also very strong. So what does this deck do? It pairs cheap red creatures with cheap red burn spells to end games quickly. The first cheap red creature we're going to be talking about is Voldaren Epicure. It's going to come down and it's going to deal 1 damage to the opponent and create a blood token. A common theme throughout this video: creatures that come down and make artifacts, especially for only 1 or 2 mana, are pretty darn good. This one comes with the additional upside of pinging your opponent. It is a great opening play for this deck. Then you've got the Goblin Bushwhacker, which is normally 1 red mana, but you can also pay an additional red mana to kick it. If it enters the battlefield kicked, it will give every creature on your side of the battlefield +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. So you want to be playing a lot of these little guys real early, and then just bam, Goblin Bushwhacker. Take a lot more than you were intending to, opponent. We are going to be pairing that with one of the best burn spells of all time. It's Lightning Bolt. 3 damage to any target, no conditions. Nothing really much to say about that, but Lightning Bolt really highlights the burn spells that you want to be finishing your opponents with. You start them with the creatures, and then when they're at a low life total, begging for mercy, you finish them with a bolt of lightning. This deck has also recently started running Clockwork Percussionist. This is a new addition from Duskmourn, and it is a hasty 1/1 for 1. And when it dies, you exile the top card of your library, and you may play it until the end of your next turn. This is one of the few ways that this deck can actually generate card advantage. The other way is Experimental Synthesizer, which essentially does this Clockwork Percussionist ability just twice. Clockwork Percussionist, good addition to this deck. I think it'll stick in the deck for a while. So that is Burn. Let's move on to Modern. Modern is a little weird this way. I'm actually not going to talk about the top 5 decks for Modern. I don't think it's going to be helpful to anyone because Wizards of the Coast recently just kind of dropped a nuke on the format when they banned Gigantha and Pioneer. They also went and banned the One Ring, Amped Raptor, and, Gigantha here as well. But they also unbanned Mox Opal, they unbanned Green Sun Zenith, and they unbanned Faithless Looting. They unbanned Splinter Twin. Splinter Twin players rejoice. So it just didn't feel right to really talk about a bunch of decks that were popular in the meta that had so many of these cards in here. It just felt like a waste of my time to talk about cards that are banned and a waste of your time to listen to talk about cards that are now banned. So instead of talking about modern, we're going to be talking about the bannings. After all, I'm not uploading again for the rest of the year, and I do kind of want to touch on this subject while the iron is still lukewarm. Uh, so overall, I think these are good. The One Ring was just becoming so ubiquitous and also kind of expensive, and they can't really reprint it. So banning this card is just a very good thing. It was just also very stupidly powerful for how much you've spent for it. Uh, and then Gigantha was again banned for its companion requirement. No one is shedding tears for the magical elk. The card that got the most discussion, from what I've seen so far, is Amtraptor. Like, people have had a pretty mixed reaction to this, uh, because the energy decks were so oppressive in modern at this point. Like, if you wanted to be winning, you basically had to be playing energy or a deck that is just so hyper tuned to beat energy, and Amtraptor is a big part of that energy strategy. The thing is, what people were noticing is that it's not the best card in the energy deck. There's like Soul Guide Warden. There's also Galvanic Discharge, that were really helping the energy decks keep going. And so Amped Raptor might have been banned for the sins of other cards. I mean, don't get me wrong, Amped Raptor is not without fault here, but I really wouldn't be surprised if more cards from the energy deck bit it. I don't think Amped Raptor will be the last one to go. So personally, I think overall these bannings are really good. I think these bannings are helping to curb the more power trap side of things that have come up in the last couple of years, and that is a start. Like, it's obviously not going to fix all the problems that have been caused by the Modern Horizon sets, because the Modern Horizon sets just really push the power level of Modern to just so far, and just made the format more of a rotating format. Like, WotC itself has actually acknowledged, saying like, yeah, we hear you. We don't want it to be a rotating format as much as people say it. So I will link some other videos here. Like, I'll put a video up here, from Jim Davis, a pro player. He goes into these bannings in good detail. Go check out his channel. He's a very good content creator, as you might imagine. He's a very good Magic player. But some of the other things I really want to talk about. Let's talk about these unbanning. So Mox Opal, that's going to help the artifact decks. Right now, there's not a like dominant artifact deck in the meta, so I think that's so I think so I think Mox Opal will be a good boon to those players. Green Sun Zenith effectively reads. Think of any green creature in your deck, add one green mana to its mana cost, and then play it from your deck. That's how Green Sun Zenith reads. You can do it for like go find like a big splashy finisher, or what I think a lot of people are going to be doing is they're just going to spend one green mana and have X equal to 0 to go get like Dryad Arbor, and so Green Sun Zenith is effectively just going to be a ramp spell. That's how I think most people are going to use it. The card that I'm most excited for is not Splinter Twin. Like, Splinter Twin, if you don't know, was a part of like a really interesting combo with Deceiver Exarch, where you could just make a lot of token copies of Deceiver Exarch over and over again, um, and then you could just hit your opponent with a bunch of 1/4s with haste. People have been calling for this card to be unbanned for years, and I don't know how much it's going to affect the meta that much, because it's 4 mana. Like, Splinter Twin is a 4 mana spell. That is not nothing, especially in this format full of cheap and free interaction. So I don't think Splinter Twin is really going to be making long-term waves in this format. Like, I think it's going to be making like it's going to see an uptick in playing for sure, because people are really going to want to get their hands on Splinter Twin and try to break it, try to make it like the glory days of Modern. But I don't see it as a long-term viable option personally. The card that has me the most excited, though, is Faithless Looting. I am an Arclight Phoenix player. Faithless Looting is great for for Arclight Phoenix. I wish we had the card in Pioneer. That would probably push the deck a little too far. But like, I might actually try out Modern. Like, I've recently avoided the format due to power level and cost concerns, but I'm excited. Like maybe I can get my hands on a playset of Faithless Lootings, some expressive iterations, and probably have to get some fetch lands and free counter spells, whatever. But and then just play my Arclight Phoenix deck in Modern and just have a blast. So that's what I'm excited for. And from what I can see online, a lot of people are really excited about these. So that's where I'm going to leave this discussion. Please tell me what you think of it in the comments below. Will you be considering playing Modern now that these bannings have happened? Are you going to be quitting Modern after these unbannings happened? So yeah, please let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think. So with that, yeah, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you very much for tuning in. I know this video is probably a lot more wordy than normal. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you all in the new year. I appreciate each and every one of you. Let's go get 100 subscribers. I will see you all in January. Have a great day, everyone. See you around.